Rock and roll. Hello, everyone. My name is Chris Blass, or at least so I claim. And with me is
Fred Cohen.
As far as we know. And this is Bit and Byte. So, Fred.
Oh, hang on. The Hacker Brothers, right, brother?
Bit and Byte, the Hacker Brothers, right. You know, with a serious, heartfelt nod to Click and Clack, the Ratchet Brothers. Great NPR. It was NPR?
NPR, yeah.
Auto show for just 4 decades. It's been interesting. So there was so I wanted to start this. I'm gonna do something right here. Hang on a second. Oh, ironically, the piece of paper is in this book by our mutual friend Win Schwartow.
Oh, there you go.
But the piece of paper is this. If we can
well, wait, I'm trying to read it. Is that like a license? It's a.
We can see that this is my 1987 W-2. We're going to hold my finger over that. From, look at the name of the company, MAGA Book, Inc. That was in Greenville, South Carolina, where I was doing a job in summer of 1987. And I wrote this Facebook post. I want to start by just reading this today to throw the conversational grenades in there. So let me just take me a second. So in 1987, I worked for a mafia money laundering operation. I mean, a magazine distribution company in South Carolina called MAGA Book. We would receive truckloads of magazines and sort them in a warehouse for shipments to towns all over the Southeast. It was an interesting perspective on the reading habits of the region. It's a whole other topic. Every once in a while, a very well-dressed Italian young man from New York would drive down in a sedan that was slightly nicer than my boss's. My boss would get extremely nervous for the day, and after the rather serious young man left, the boss would buy beer for us all. We expanded into shipping pumice for stonewashed jeans. Laborers in Turkey were pickaxing, is that a word? It is now. A mountain into a molehill and shoveling it into plastic burlap sacks. Those sacks were stacked in the nastiest old steel containers you can imagine and shipped to Charleston, South Carolina on the decks of tramp freighters. Since the saltwater-soaked pumice made the containers twice the legal weight for the highways, I swear to God, literal Smokey and the Bandit T-top, you know, the Flaming Phoenix and all that, Smokey and the Bandit Trans Am with a CB radio would run ahead of the trucks looking for open way stations, which the trucks would then get off the highway and drive around. And then me and another guy would unload those stinking wet 123 trailers by hand, shipping 150,000 a day. So for all of you out there who wore your stonewashed Levi's with your big 80s hair, you're welcome. And don't be surprised if you owe the family a favor one day. So,
well, there you go.
Right? That just had me thinking, and knowing we're going to have this conversation, I thought that would be fun to start with that, because in the comments we went, interesting conversation going on. Stories of the similar situations in the 80s and so forth, and some conversation about perhaps maybe not forever, right? And I got to hang out with the author David Brin this spring in San Francisco at RSA and talk with him about his book Kiln People. And one of the things I love about Kiln People, which is arguably set a couple hundred years in the future, is that conspiracy is just astronomically difficult. Really, really, really hard to pull off. He doesn't go into it in great detail, though it is a sort of it's a detective novel, so you get to see the premise for all that. But it's basically just an extrapolation of current trends, right? When it gets really, really easy for people to discover things, and people like discovering things, and you look at so much of the corruption in the world today, and as I started there in the 80s in one case, honest to God, literally, TV mafia operation kind of thing. It happens because the time to transparency is high. It takes a long time to be caught. Most criminals and most terrorists are basically just stupid, but stupid people can commit crimes these days and get away with it because it takes a long time to catch them, to sort through the bloody paperwork. And I just don't know if that's always going to be the thing. And you and I have debated that for eons. I thought it would be fun to just stir the pot.
I think there's a huge difference between the criminal side of it and I'll call it the legitimate side, but that's close to the edge. So you'd better hope that, as a hacker, we continue to have the flexibility to do things in innovative ways. If we don't, then we'll destroy ourselves.
Right.
So having said that, at the Radon Project in the late 1980s, we were using toluene. For those of you unfamiliar with toluene, I think it's 80 some degrees, somewhere in the low 80 degree level range Fahrenheit. It becomes rapidly self-expansive. It explodes. And once it goes, man, it's like, yeah, it's like worse than gasoline, right? Toluene. So we were using toluene to process charcoal to measure radon gas. So whatever that whole process is, I'm not going to go to that process. So we had barrels and barrels of toluene sitting in a building. Now, this was an older building in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in a warehouse area. And as a result, in the summer in Pittsburgh, it can get, up into the 90s occasionally, or at that time it certainly could. And with, 98% humidity, right? And it wasn't raining, it was oozing is what we called it. If you walk along, you could just become wet from walking through there. So what happens, of course, is at night it's relatively cool, but in the day it might get quite hot. And this is in the third floor of a warehouse with 5 floors. And the way it's arranged, it was getting pretty close to temperature. And so, the first approach was, it's an old place, doesn't have air conditioning, but we had some air conditioners that we put into windows. So using duct tape and cardboard boxes and aluminum foil, we built some ducts that would carry cool from wherever the air conditioners were, over to the toluene, with the idea of keeping it, in the upper 70s. So
the idea, yes. So
as long as it doesn't get too hot outside, that's okay. All right. So finally, we ended up another company, Radon Testing Corporation of America, acquired all the assets from the Radon Project. And when they did so, they didn't particularly want the toluene. So we're sitting there with all this toluene, and all this other stuff is gone. There was a slight challenge. The challenge is, well, what do you do with all this stuff? So my Uncle Bill Powell, William S. Powell of the whatever cookbook, right?
Right. Yeah. Anarchist cookbook. Yes.
So he decided that we could get this done by bringing it over to his place in Ohio, where he had a relatively cool underground storage facility, and where he could then mix it with other things to use it as fuel for his farm, for all the equipment. So he basically got free gasoline for quite a while, and so forth. So we're going to do this, and so he's going to bring over a truck. Now the problem is, of course, during the day, at that time of year, the temperature was such that you really couldn't drive that truck from Pittsburgh all the way into Thornville, Ohio, which is where I lived at mile marker 100 on I-70, without exceeding the temperature, and that would not be good. So we didn't really want, that explosive effect. So we had to do it at night. So naturally, right? So the midnight run.
How punk is that? Yeah,
right. So he, brings the truck over, and we load everything on the truck, and drive it over to Ohio before it's light out, and get it into the. So my point is, all that transparency, the net effect would have been either a great deal of expense, or things blowing up, or other things going bad and awry, as opposed to hacking it, which was, as safe as you reasonably can be. It's as safe as any other truck on the road, not particularly violating any regulation at that time. But if it's transparency, if people are saying, oh, they're moving all that toluene, what is the implication, right? There's the implication for, somebody deciding there's some regulation or some local something, or they don't want to drive, or they're just going to protest, you can't drive it through here, any of those sorts of problems. And then there's the possibility that somebody who's looking for, a truck full of explosives to hijack, since we don't have a whole bunch of, armed guard and stuff such along, it's a convenient, opportunity to hijack. So the thing is, there's a mix between transparency and confidentiality, And you and I both know that when we say transparency, that doesn't mean everything. It means the thing you're supposed to see. But I just thought I'd bring it up because as a hacker, I almost never want transparency around the things that I'm testing out until I know what's going to work. And then I don't mind having it out there.
Well, and this, I'm glad you came to that point, because this is the conversation I keep wanting to have, and I have it with you and others, and when I'm, in supply chain, cybersecurity, deep in the weeds with the fellow nerds, go nerds. We can get into it, but most of the time you just can't, right? Because the assumption is, everybody gets to see everything now. It's like, no, that would be stupid. Everybody doesn't even want to see everything. And no, what we're talking about is, and I tried to put it in words that part of this conversation on Facebook. If we can over time develop those systems, the ones on the cyber side, give us the transparency we need to keep up with things, and we have to, so we will. Then the same structures can help anyone have the same level of visibility, and it's the important part, into whatever they should be able to and choose to look into, right? So we need to get past this conversation, the idea that, in cybersecurity is to threat information sharing vulnerabilities, sharing supply chain information, these same cliche questions when you first start talking about it. Does that mean that I have to give all my information to everybody and, lay naked out in the highway? No. What we're talking about is just getting better at sharing information. The information you should be able to get to, making it easier to get to that information faster and giving you a better feel for whether it's good information or appropriate for your need to know that.
So that same problem you're describing with people understanding, and there's this subtlety involved. Okay. So we get stupid words like zero trust, which is just pure foolishness, right? I mean, it's ridiculous, right? And my saying, of course, was don't trust zero trust, which is consistent with zero trust. But another example of this, very similar, is from cryptography, right? In cryptography, the good cryptographic folks, the people with expertise, basically say the algorithm should not be secret. The reason is that if the algorithm is any good, then its secrecy is not the issue, right? In fact, what you want is to expose it to more people that can possibly, figure out how to get past it, so you can know sooner what the problem is. And no cryptographic system, other than the perfect system, the information theory based one, has survived for very long in the world. I mean, before Shannon's theory, nothing lasted very long, and once Shannon's theory came along, all the other systems before that were gone and dead. And that's when it shifted over to a complexity-based approach. Thus public key crypto systems and such. And the complexity approach is about a computational leverage. The ability to use the key is computationally much less expensive than the ability to break it when being used. But this idea that the system can't be secret, right? And that's right. It's usually better, not always. I mean, if you have systems that are imperfect and you want to be careful for a period of time before people discover the nature of the system, you can usually get away with that they don't know what it's about. So the lack of transparency can be effective as a security measure. However, the culture that grew out of this, like so many of the cultures in cybersecurity, they stem from some origin, right? The change your password do-si-do series that I wrote, it took 20 years to fix this problem. This thing where you keep changing your password all the time, turns out it has no effective security value just to change it every so often.
It does a slight negative effect. Yes.
Yes, it makes things worse. Right? That's correct. Not better. But that stems from the requirement to change keys in cryptographic systems over time, assuming somebody can break the cryptographic system. So this comes from World War II. If you know how much time it takes to break the system and you want to reduce the probability of somebody getting a message in the time frame where it has to be kept secret, right? Because these are for operations. So, after the bombs have fallen, telling them that we're going to be bombing this location is not any longer a secret that matters, right? So figuring all that out means that you need to change those keys, right? So they were changing them daily, but the Germans were changing their keys daily to the Enigma machines, and they were being broken daily. But in any case, that's the idea. That got brought forth into computer security for passwords. And I don't know whether nobody bothered to do the analysis of it, but it's foolishness. It does not serve a beneficial purpose for the most part. So that's an example of a myth. And it's still sort of being extinguished today. And you still have to change the bloody password. There's sites I go to, you still have to change it once a month. Or if you don't use it for a month, which means, okay, so you have to log in, every 2 weeks so they can leave you alone? That's what a waste. So now, the idea that secrecy is averse to security, for example, in an operating system or on a piece of hardware, is the height of foolishness. There is no security without physical security, because without physical security, you can physically observe whatever it is and alter whatever it is and, deny service that you've taken apart. Whatever you want to do, you're physically able to. But the other one is the idea that no secrecy for communications or in the algorithm. Well, I'm sorry. Without secrets, everybody knows your password.
Right.
Without secrets, everybody knows all the minutia about all the keys being used all the time for all this cryptographic stuff. None of it works without keeping some things
and
secret.
your house, right? They know about the key under the flower pot by the door. They know that the one window is usually unlocked, or if you hit it a certain way, right? So
the mythos that carries through, because people, the idea of subtlety is a problem. Same with CIA, right? Confidentiality, integrity, availability. The CIA no. First of all, almost always integrity is more important.
Right.
So, and availability, if you're in a real-time control system, a lack of availability causes rapid expansion of materials, otherwise known as explosions. Right.
Right.
And explosive growth in the financial industry is thought to be good, but not in the operational technology.
It also sometimes has rapid unplanned disassembly in moments. Yes,
that's correct. So the point I'm trying to make is that what you're talking about is just an example. This transparency being mean we share everything. It's just an example of the lack of subtlety and sophistication in people in the fields that we work in. And I think it's true in almost every field, except what we'll call the professions, right? So, if you're a doctor and you say, well, so your knee hurts when you do this? Well, don't do that, right? Okay, that was great for hee-haw, but might not fix your knee problem.
Right. Well, and again, I hesitate. I'm hesitating to say it, but I'm going to say it anyways. I think part of this again may be a generational thing, right? That there is a cohort, trained to think a certain way, and there's another cohort coming along behind us, and this is normal. History always does that. But this is a very particular time, right? And the not understanding the subtlety thing. As I started this, 1987. I'm just married, working in South Carolina. End up landscaping through some college and so forth. But these are the 80s. We didn't have internets, right? We didn't have, I certainly didn't, or cell phones or digital cameras or anything. Whereas it's just an entirely different world, right? And it was easier to believe.
Just for clarity, in the late 1980s, I had 2 cell phones.
Right.
This was at the Radon Project, and the story that we've talked about the way I use cell phones before, but those were bricks. I mean, they literally the size and shape of a brick, right?
Right. But to the topic of subtlety and to this topic, right? Because I really do believe, because you and I have debated the Star Wars versus Star Trek future, thing a million times, and we will a million again. And I don't think it's not Oz, but if you actually read the books, Oz isn't the Hollywood Oz anyway. It's a little bit dark and scary, but in the future always will be. However, right, I think a lot of the negative things we're always used to being burdened with aren't always necessarily going to be there, right? Like living outdoors, that was like a thing for a couple 100,000 years, not getting rained on. So I think this, this ease of criminality, because look, if you want to break things on the internet, if you want to lead a life of crime, it's not that hard. You have a reasonable chance of getting away with it. If you're smart at all, you got you're way ahead of the pack.
It never has been hard. Let's be clear, right?
Right, never has.
Crime has always been something that's easy to carry out and hard to catch, right? But the system of justice has changed substantially in the way it treats these things, because long ago there wasn't that much of a system of justice, or to the extent that there was one, it was, I would say, rather harsh.
Yeah.
And people complain about the lack of harshness in our current system. This is the broken windows thing, right? But so what happens here right now? I just heard something in the news, probably within the last day, about somebody who was he was driving a car at 90 miles an hour and rear-ended a car sitting at a stoplight, killing the newlywed woman in the car about 2 weeks after she had gotten married. Okay. This guy gets charged and he's out on bail within 24 hours, pending trial. So he's going to just do it again and kill somebody else. So, that it's what's it called? Catch and release, right? Because the prisons are too full. And who are they?
And why are the prisons full? Because we spend $200 billion a year having zero. Well, actually, we have again in this case slightly positive impact on illegal drug use in the U.S. We spend $200 billion a year to not stop any American from access to and using all the illegal drugs they want, and in fact, making the problems worse and keeping 1.5 million people in the jails. So there is no room for, to your point. So we have these systemic sort of stupid problems. We've done that one for 40 years. And it feels like we may be slowly backing out of it, but it may take another 40 more. But again, this I like some science fiction sometimes, because if you look out, it's not, we're talking a long way, a couple hundred years. There's a couple of human lifetimes, right? An old person meets a little baby, and that happens 2 or 3 times, and all of a sudden it's 300 years from now. And so it takes some of that fine-grained motion out of the daily life, right? There's always going to be that. However, I think this, right now, we were talking earlier about the simple things as opposed to subtleties. The surveillance state, George Orwell, right? The 1984 state where, which many would say in the British Isles and the UK has been there for a long time. They've classically known for having the closed circuit television network from hell.
Well,
and just cameras everywhere.
But it's realizable today to a larger extent because
anyway. Right. Well,
right.
And
you could have done it by having 1 million people sitting there watching these screens for the other 1 million people, right? And then they trade places, right? So it's 12-hour shifts. I watch you, then you watch me. But it gets all
everywhere, right? This is hopefully everybody's seen these sort of charts, like the number of pictures taken ever, and then like the invention of digital cameras and so forth. The numbers, it's not exponential, doesn't speak to it, but at some point cameras get really, really cheap and electronic, and we're here, right? So
they're ridiculously cheap.
If there was a Orwellian authoritarian government structure that put in place technologies and systems and policies to give unfettered access to all those cameras all the time with no oversight, no discretion, that would be bad. So would be getting hit in the face with a frozen salmon, right? So we
could put a tariff. We could put a tariff on cameras, on digital cameras. Say a 1 cent each, and that would destroy the entire industry.
Well, and again, David Brin he plays this really nice. It's a classic in the 1930s. God, I love all these actors. Not Humphrey Bogart, Sam Spade, the character, sort of Sam Spade storyline. But you can see the parts of it. Like part of it is that in this assumed future, if you have a camera, you can sell the access to that camera, and everybody does. Right. There's just, there's social platforms. You just, create an account, basically. It never really gets into it, but you can assume it's all there. I got a shop. I have 3 security cameras. I will sell that feed. If somebody comes looking and says, hey, has anybody got any footage of this time in this place or this shape or this whatever?
Yeah.
I can sell those.
Another alternative. Yeah.
Right. And it's as I'm sort of meandering down that path, here, it's a model you can see it working. Right. And I can see technical solutions and policy solutions that says They know your local government can't have access to those cameras without your knowledge, unless there is one of these events that is attested to in the system at this time, and you can see all those things happening at once, right? So I know that the government's getting into my cameras, but I can also see right there is that nuclear bomb coming, and in this case, I agree. Or you're paying me for it, or whatever.
So I watch these old Perry Mason episodes, trying to get my way through the whole series because I enjoy them. And just in one of the ones I watched in the recent past, there was a person, in a bar who took photographs of people. This is Perry Mason's like in the 50s or whatever. It's a long time ago.
Black and white.
Yeah. And so, they're just taking pictures in the bar. And it turns out this picture has a picture of the person Mason is defending in the bar when she claimed she wasn't there, talking to the person who was subsequently killed, of course, because it's Perry Mason. It's got to look pretty damn guilty along the way. So this woman who takes these pictures in the bar usually tries to sell them in the bar, and it's a subtlety. Oh, you're in the bar with some young lady, and oh, look, I have a picture. Wouldn't you like to buy it from me? Oh, yes, the negatives are available too. It might be a celebration, but probably, So, so she, goes to offer Perry Mason the picture, and she has it in an envelope, and he's, asking a question or two. He gets a phone call, and apparently they've located the person in the picture. So, and she wanted $500 for it, which, in the 1950s, that's like $50,000. It's a lot of money today, whatever it is. And so he says no, because he's already identified the person. What he said was, if you lower the price, you might have had a sale. So, and he had explained to her that the police won't pay anything for it. Right. And they're going to get it eventually, and they won't pay anything for it. So 500 is a bit high. So subsequently, of course, the police do get it. She takes it to the police, and so they get it, and it's for free. But then she starts testifying against it. It turns out that picture also has something in it that she didn't know was in it. Nobody knew was in it, that the police figured out. And now the picture was bad. So this surveillance thing, and the people selling the surveillance stuff for different reasons, for extortion or what have you, is not exactly a new story. We're talking about, it's 70-year-old, just from the TV and movies. So one of the questions I have is, are there any new stories?
Well, in narrative fiction, I did a Inevitability Curve episode with Deb Radcliffe yesterday, right? Our mutual friend, one of the original cybercrime investigative journalist, now novelist, writing exactly this sort of stuff, folks. And like a lot of things in the modern world, there's more of us alive now than have ever been alive at once. This enormous chunk of all humans ever born, we're all alive right now. So we look at history, we're looking at, by relative terms, this tiny number of people who for a couple of years did a few things that we know of. Now, though, how many narrative arcs are there? How many stories are there? Right? How many different, the honeymooners, classic, I love, I love the honeymooners, right? But that every sitcom, right? And by the 70s and the 80s, all this content we're getting, through our free channels at the time is quite often two guys in an apartment in Los Angeles, rewriting the honeymooners again, right? And saying, no, but this time, it's, these, the characters have these characters, whether they're tall and a short one or whatever, right? But just the same bloody narrative over and over again. I think the answer to that one, getting on metaphysical, is just that no, right? The human experience is kind of similar. However, right, those little differences, when they're not just manufactured, on demographics, to get our attention, to get our eyeballs, that's everything, right? There is nobody like Fred Cohen, and never will be, never in the entire span of the universe. I mean, not just your DNA, but you and your life experience and everything else. No, we're living the same sort of stories, and that's
but hang on. What about on the next loop? What about on the next loop?
Not even the same. Nope. There's one hair, that's always sticking out on one side of your head. It's not going to stick it out ever again. You won't be the same.
Hair is that? I've been thinking about cutting my hair shorter, so I don't have this problem.
I've been thinking about cutting my hair.
Why would you do that? You haven't done it yet.
Right? Well, once a year, whether it needs it or not. So this, as I said before, so I decided on this podcast, the only one where I'm going to actually explain my my shelfware. I know that the logo in this display kind of hides it, but back in 1996,
Bring it up to the camera so I can really see it.
Yeah, I bought like half a dozen of these.
A little bit lower, a little bit lower. There you
Mars
go. The
Pathfinder, Hot Wheels.
Oh yeah, the action pack. Okay, great. Fantastic.
Yeah, with the rover itself, and everybody, today will recognize this little guy over here because this is what in the movie The Martian, Matt Damon digs up. Takes a jaunt over there, grabs the old Pathfinder thing, sets up communication with Earth again. So I have a couple of these still in the box. So that is my.
All right. So what are they worth, and what are they worth, and what value have you not gotten out of them between then and now that makes it worth keeping them in the box as opposed to playing with them?
Well, because they were fairly cheap at the time, and having bought half a dozen of them, I immediately opened up one or two. So I've had them out and done all the things with them. The value I got out of keeping some still in the box is that 28 years later, I still have them in the box. So
yeah, I mean, what are you going to do? Are you going to be the collector? Are you going to sell it or auction it off? When you run out of money,
No, I mean, things like this. I mean, look, there are only so many things I have from earlier versions of me, right? And this is one of these things that just hung around for a long, long time. Everybody, I'm sure, at some point thinks of that. I should grab some of those later on. They'll be valuable. I should hang, or you do, and they get lost along the way or whatever. So this for me is that one time I said, I'm going to get some of these. I'm going to keep them so that, decades later I can go, hey, look at that. And that's the value it has to me. So I can't, I can't replace that for $1 million. So, it has no monetary value to me because I wouldn't sell it. It's just I'd rather see it just lost in a flood because at least that's part of the story.
Yeah. So memorabilia is an interesting, subject matter, right? So things that trigger your memory. So when I was young, less than 13 years old, my family, my father and mother were both essentially professors at a university. And so during the summers, they would take the summers when we were of the right ages and, drive across the US or drive through Europe or what have you. Right. So we would end up camping across Europe, camping across the US, 4 kids and 2 adults and so forth. And one of the things my mother, this is in the days where cameras were pieces of film, right?
36 shots, 24. Yeah.
Well, 24 or 36 or even 12, depending on the size of the roll. But they were expensive, and you take a roll and you've got to develop it, right? So you got to probably hold it for a while. So we would be driving, through some European road, which is, bricks along the side of a road with a huge steep cliff and some enormous scenery in the background, driving, jammed into the car. And my mother would say, "Stop, I want to take a picture of this." And my father would pull over, near these cliff sides, and everybody gets out. We have to stand there waiting for a picture. And, right now,
other cars shedding off the hills, screeching tires. Yeah, I got it. Yeah.
I cannot stand it when people with digital cameras sit there and try and just get just the right picture and focus. Wait. What are you talking about? Just keep pushing the button while you do that. And one of those pictures, maybe 10 of them are going to be great. Or turn it on movie and take the video, take 35 seconds of video or however many seconds we're willing to stand there. And by the time you're done and stop it, there will be a frame in there that does it. And
there will be a thumbnail out of this that, that's good enough. Yep.
We spent, 5 minutes. Oh, move a little bit to the left. Oh, move a little bit to the right. And I got to the point where I just can't tolerate it anymore. I hate it. And part of that is I just don't have pictures of most of my life anymore. I'm not interested in stopping somewhere to take a picture. I'm interested in living through that moment and enjoying it and not dealing with some other aspect of it.
Well, which has been interesting, as you know, I've this content creation stuff. We've kind of been doing it forever, right? As we both know, it's like a lot of what we do is performance art, right? Performance, performing in front of one person or a group of people or whatever. Hello. So you got to have, if you are the product, then you got to think about it that way. And yeah, I prefer just to do things. However, right, I take a lot of pictures along the way, both for my own purposes, so I can kind of look at things. Sometimes it's always surprising. You do something like this desk project in this office building here, and you take a picture of it, and I'll be sitting here at it looking at the picture because I can't see it because it's right in front of me. Right, the picture is easier to see than the thing itself. But getting on camera myself, it's like, you always feel a little awkward and self-conscious, but I know how I feel. I like to see you somewhere. I mean, a picture that you take from standing where you are, I can get off Google, So
I think we're going to really put our audience to sleep here. So,
I hope so. Do we have an audience?
Do you have something interesting and exciting to talk about? I mean, we can talk a little bit about what's been happening recently in the disinformation space with what's his name and what's his name telling us that $750 is all you get, and they're going to take your property when you're in a hurricane.
Right.
Or I really think the weather control, that's impressive. The weather control, yeah. Come on, you heard it from Marjorie Taylor Greene.
It's true. It's a government plot. What they did was they actually burned petroleum, believe it or not, for decades and decades and decades, just to cause these hurricanes right now. It was planned out in advance. The kind of weather computers they had 70 years ago in the early Illuminati.
That told you how to do it. No, it's the Jewish space lasers.
Jewish space lasers, yes. I really miss the Jewish.
And I want to reinforce that.
We had the aurora last night. It was beautiful aurora last night. That was, in fact, I know that was the last constellation of Jewish space lasers, being decommissioned, burning up in the ionosphere. But
no, I want it to be made clear that there are Jewish space lasers, and if you continue to attack Israel or Jewish people, that we're going to take you out with Jewish space lasers and wreak havoc on the world. But on LinkedIn, I saw the device. Joe Biden was there with his hand on, turning a dial on the weather control device, and it was on LinkedIn, right. So it must be true.
It must be true. Yeah.
It must be true.
Disinformation campaigns, right? So, it's funny, in so many of the just meetings I'm doing, in a normal week, and much less in this content stuff, interviews with people in emergency response, you have to talk about disinformation, and with cybersecurity, you're talking about disinformation. It sort of makes sense. But Emerson Tan and Rakesh Barinio, two folks on the Inevitability Curve show just in the last couple of weeks, both been doing emergency response and humanitarian aid and disaster. Rakesh worked for USAID. And it's the biggest problem right now is, people actually working really hard. A group of people, just imagine a floor or two in an office building in St. Petersburg, Russia, where people are sitting there, not high paid folks, but they've got a job and they're working hard every day. And they're pretending to be 277 American citizens on different social media platforms, propagating information that supports the interests of the Russian federal government. That's a thing. That just exists.
Yeah, but so that's a generic approach. So I like to bring these things home. So I was, and I can't tell you the details about it. I was at a meeting with U.S. Secret Service folks talking about responses to a much, very large scale natural disaster where, lots of people died and there were, burnt bodies and all these things, right? And the description of the disinformation campaign surrounding that is, very frightening and to the point. So what's happening here is first responders are spending, weeks away from family. And the kinds of things that you're seeing is their family members, so they're identified. Their family members are then communicated, with using social media or telephone calls or what have you, being threatened, being told that their spouse is, having sex with dead bodies, right? I mean, is, eating the mutilated people, you name it. I mean, just sick, really sick. And being directed at the families of the first responders, so that their families get disheartened and call them up, and and just, it's the most disruptive, disgraceful, disgusting sort of thing. And it's one of those things where, as much as I notion that free speech is a good thing, that's not free speech. As much as I notion that surveillance is a bad thing, I think surveillance of those things, the ability to track it rapidly to the source and send somebody out to arrest that person and charge them with a crime and sit them in a jail cell,
Yes.
pending trial, and then have a trial and have them, assuming they did it, found guilty and put in jail for a while and punished brutally for this, and have the public aware of this, and not something where it takes 6 months to get it to trial, something where they are arrested, within a few hours, right? So now, obviously, when they're offshore and doing this, it's more difficult, but having some larger scale, more transparent discussion with their country, with their nation state, in public, broadcast everybody in the nation state there, so they know that this is what their leaders are doing. They know this is what's being promoted. Do you want to live in a country where your leader is doing this to people? Right? Is that really what you support? And the ability to cut it off and to do this in real time. It just seems to me that the future of our society depends on that, because of the ability to rapidly, I mean, almost instantaneously look at a picture, use the current AI automation to associate that with an individual person, go find out enough information about that person to find out, who they're married to, where their kids are. Their kids are at school and they're getting phone calls talking about their kids, aren't going to show up at home today unless they, it's horrible. Needs to be stopped, and it's worth the disruption to privacy to do that, in my view.
Oh, and viscerally and emotionally, I'm sitting here agreeing with you 1,000%, right? So let me see if I can take this, take a constructive path in this at all, right? So Terry Pratchett, in his Discworld books, continually comes back to the issue of justice and transparency, right? And often enough having characters say, justice needs to be seen. It needs to be seen to happen, right? That's kind of the whole point, right? Because it may or may not have happened. Maybe it did. That's a whole different world, an entirely different world. They're not related. They look similar. It's like Canada and the U.S. They're not the same. They have poutine and back bacon up here. Make it that way you will.
Yep. Justice delayed is justice denied.
Right. Absolutely. So this is, a while back you said one of my favorite things, right? That we need the space to hack, right? And maybe we can put things together this way, right? In recent conversations of the last number of weeks, with you and a couple other folks, right? I'm coming more and more to the conclusion that that digital consciousness may not be a thing. I mean, like ever thing. It's not a thing. It's very popular right now to talk about AI. We're going to upload on digital.
It seems like it's conscious because Eliza seemed like it was a psychiatrist.
What is that little bobbing thing that dips the water? Remember that? That was great. The red liquid.
Oh yeah.
Sure looked alive, but so justice needs to be seen, right? And the problem we have right now, which is causing great expense, aside from the horrific acts of humans to each other, are just it's the cost ends up being worth doing what needs to be done, right? I'd rather not sacrifice freedoms or privacy and so forth. I'd probably like to make it really easy to spend less time chasing around, because again, I don't think other than the ones who are literally working in St. Petersburg or Tehran or some malicious actor being paid to pretend to be some American citizen, I don't think any of those people out there making death threats and being a bunch of assholes are lying. I think they actually believe what that psychotic thing in their head, right? And they actually think they're doing the right thing because the person they're eating babies or working with reptile aliens to steal our spaghetti sauce or something, right? So it's so as much as I would do anything I can to stop people doing those sort of things, what I'd rather do is stop the people who are making people do those things for their own benefit, right? And it's so bloody easy, right? It's so easy to convince people that the sky is green, and that doesn't have to be the case forever, right? It doesn't have to be this easy. Just keep it in the cybersecurity space, all along the way, usually, one of the learning points is that what people are attacking are the easy parts, right? And when you fix that, they move on to the next thing that's easy to attack. And they typically don't even attack the things that are already easy to attack until the things that are easier to attack have already been thoroughly attacked, right? And the fact that it is so effective right now, influence campaigns and confusing demographics of people getting to fight with each other, make them think that you're on their side, whichever side it is. Again, it doesn't matter. It's way too easy. It doesn't have to stay that way forever. I'm sorry, I'm ranting.
When we were brought up, when I was brought up, it was in the shadow of World War II. Right? It wasn't right after World War II. It took a couple of years before I was born. But it was in the shadow of World War II. And there were all these great counter-propaganda movies during World War II that were made that were, demonstrating how people get caught up in these sick things. And, and they're wonderful stories. And you see them, they're in black and white, but remakes would be wonderful. But it was sort of part of the World War II internal propaganda culture to unify the country and to counter the propaganda that was being used against us. We seem to have lost that capacity. The notion somehow that the great diversity that we have makes it so that we cannot create those conceptions of good and evil in the same way, with real stories of real people. Now, having said that, there are some pretty good TV series on this, right? There's American Justice is one of them. And I'm not, they don't pay me to advertise this, right? But American Justice, they have these stories, these basically news stories from beginning to end of con, people that are con artists, people that are killers, and so forth, and how they ended up in and interacting with and through the justice system. And it's really instructive. But on the other hand, I'm a professional in the space. So when I watch that stuff, I see the things I already know about. I'm looking at that. I'm not shocked or amazed by what happened. I'm just saying, oh man, that's this technique, that's that technique. And this idea of I don't know about, again, when you were young or where you were, but you're not supposed to get in a car with a stranger. Don't take candy from a stranger. Don't take a car ride for a stranger. Right? It was taught to you when you were young. You walk out on the street. If somebody's trying to pick you up, you run away. And today we have things like Amber Alerts, and I mean, it's not that we're not watching out for each other. We are. It's that the divide and conquer strategy being used against us is making it so that some people not only are not looking out for other people, they hate them. For no reason. They probably never met one, right? A Haitian immigrant. Have never met. How do you know if you've never met one? You might have met a bunch of them. You have no clue. But we can see here's an other and go after the other. It's so I was thinking about this last night. And one of the things that comes to mind is that the battle we see today, sort of for the control of the future of humanity, is about the old world hierarchical version where there are these, kings and knights, whatever they are, these superior people whose job it is to take care of the rest of us. Yes, we work for them, we do what they say, but they're responsible for our well-being, right? Versus the egalitarian view of this, which is to say that, excuse me, you're not responsible for my well-being and you can't tell me what to do. Get out of the way. So that it's sort of freedom to suffer the consequences of your own actions versus freedom, as in slavery, to not worry about anything. It's all taken care of. Nothing can go wrong or right. It's, here's what you are, here's what you do, and you have a good life, whatever that level of goodness is. The striving versus the accepting. the Ayn Rand view of the world, where the elites go to some island and everybody else collapses. We all know if the elites went to some island, they'd starve to death, and the rest of us would be just fine.
Yeah, you kind of have to have that tens of thousands of Russian peasants serving your ancestors for generations to have that sort of freedom. But it's I had a positive spin on that one for a minute there, but I've lost it in the bleak darkness. But but it's interesting anyways. I think and I know. You and I, it's interesting. You and I disagree on Elon Musk in an interesting way, right? I think there are bad actors in the world. I think Kim Jong Il, and Vladimir Putin, just named two of them. Serious bad actors don't intend anybody any good. Actually, the comic book evil genius kind of folks, and I can name others, but we'll just leave it at that to keep it simple. But I think there are folks like Musk that, again, like less known people who are making death threats to emergency response first responders. I think he means well. I think he means it about the freedom of speech and so forth. I would disagree with him on a lot of things, which is an easy way to say I think the wiring in his head is basically completely scrambled at this point on the topic.
So I saw
some being won over to understand that at some point. Which is different than thinking it's supposed to be that way, the authoritarian thing. That I tend to agree. That billionaire class is actually it aligns with their motivations.
I saw some interesting news on this recently. So where did Elon Musk grow up?
In his dad's, homes paid for with South African emerald money, as I understand.
Well, in South Africa.
Yeah.
So he was a teenager.
South Africa, yeah.
That's right. Afrikaner, I think, is the term. Well, it turns out if you start to look at, and I'm going to go into the political realm here, if you start to look at Trump and a lot of the other people around him, this whole, the Afrikaner wealthy people are part of that team. And if you look at their takeover of for certain aspects of the media, right? It's they are playing the game of going back to what was the apartheid that they were under. I mean, that is part of their thought process. And then, and they're aligning with the neo-Nazis, right? Who are similarly oriented. And they're some of the biker gangs, not all of them, some of the biker gangs, which are similarly oriented, and some of the criminal organizations that are similarly oriented. Now, I don't mean to say it's only on the right, because we have a pile of useful idiots on the left. Right, they're also, being subject to the propaganda, and there are super elites on the left that are, whatever their spin on the world is, it's not realistic. And I find it fascinating that you see Liz Cheney and leading a Republican cadre in support of Harris, and actually out on the campaign trail. That's more severe than anything. I have a sneaking suspicion that there can be a centrist party in the United States, a large centrist party and two fringe parties instead of a two-party system, a three-party system.
Where the centrist one is elected almost all the time, and have to screw up in one direction or the other to get pushed out. Which is and again, that's a whole other thread. We may not have time to even.
Let's say 40% is the centrist party, right?
It has to have enough to go along with it.
But my point is, it's not strong enough to just dominate. It has to ally with the left or the right to get anything done. But it allies with different ones of them at different times.
On different topics. No, and again, I think this is the kind of thing that I would expect looking forward over generational time frames. It's not. It again makes very good contemporary thriller content to watch, for entertainment, but it's not realistic to assume that people will be born and live, generations, and live their entire lives over even just a handful of generations, and not learn any of these bloody lessons, right? And pointing to the past and showing how there's been recurring themes and so forth. I don't think is also missing the point. largely speaking, people in the past had no idea of the past. They didn't basically know that it existed or anything beyond their immediate range. We had to think about, it's not entirely internet, but it's printing and reading and literacy and the availability, access to text and
Right.
information.
People don't know anything beyond their actual experience.
But I imagine that I'm a huge. If I bring this back to somewhere near where I started, I'm a huge believer in hacking, and individual freedoms, and having enough room in a system. Systems are made for humans, and humans need to be able to be human inside them when we have to be inside them, which is a lot, but whatever. At the same time, having transparency into, right, and I'm perfectly happy. Well, think. One of these sort of standard things we say is like, oh yeah, if you're rich enough, you can park anywhere you want. Because screw it, you just pay the parking ticket. You pay $600 to park for an hour, but I have $10 billion, so I don't care. The law doesn't apply to me. It's a
minor financial inconvenience.
Right. And in back to David Brennan killing people, right? I'm perfectly happy living in a world where I'm going through life and I'm making a decision. That's a $300 fine, and just doing it, right? But I know I'm doing it. I see I'm doing it. I know I'm going to get the fine. I'm not thinking I can get away with it. Maybe I won't get caught. Maybe I will get caught. Just bake it in.
So now this is where you start to cure things. You start to say your fine is this percentage of everything you own, which means if you're poor,
you want to be punitive as opposed to right.
If you have nothing, feel free to commit crimes.
Right. Well, but, yeah, and I understand what you mean by that, but my point is more than just the economic. I think it's normal and human, and we want to have the choice to realize that we're going to break the rules, and there's going to be a consequence. And I think it'd be healthier for us overall to, instead of wondering if we're going to get away with breaking the rules, planning to break the rules, breaking the rules, worrying about being caught breaking the rules, if you just know you're going to be caught, because a lot of the time, the balance should be right. If the rules are equitable and real and normal and so forth, you're like, it's like, all right, I know, but this time I'm doing it anyway. I know it's not in the rules, but I knew it wasn't, and I made the decision anyways. I knew what the consequences were, and I accepted those.
So I think the key here is about the consequences. Yeah, let's suppose everybody always gets caught with everything, and they are punished commensurate with the appropriate punishment. Right now, the question is, what's the appropriate punishment?
Well, right? And then we literally don't have the time, and I got to 3:00 Eastern, so we got to go on that one. But I would tend to agree with you that just and reasonable policies, rules and laws would take that into account. If I really don't want you parking there because it is a hospital and tow-away zone, and you think you can do it because you can afford the $1,200 fine I put on it, which is enough to discourage most people, I might charge you $1 million. Sorry, I'm perfectly fine with rules that make sense, right? What are you trying to achieve, right?
Liberty and justice for all.
Right. Me too.
Yeah. The problem is, what the heck does that mean? What is that? Right. What's just, right?
It's something we can increment. It is whatever it is. It needs to be seen. Times of transparency needs to be minimal.
Yeah, it would be good if I knew that I could do this or that, and I could get away with it too.
Right. Anyways, for anybody who's actually watching out there, what are you doing here? Did you see the end of Ferris Bueller? Go watch it. But thanks for your time, Fred. As always, love you, man. See you later. Good to see you. Have a good weekend.
Brother, man. It's brother, man. Brother,
man.
The Hacker Brothers.
The Hacker Brothers. Cheers.
Victory. Oh, peace. One
victory. Peace and victory. Bye.